But can we go back to Zadorov though? Because we started on that, and then
Yeah.
Pinder joined the chat, and Pinder,
he pindered us.
Pindered, yeah.
Yes, I do.
So, why were there other guys coming out? Blake Coleman, the next day, sort of trying to tamp it down. Oh, sometimes you just get a little emotional and say things you don't mean. Like it was as clear-eyed an assessment after a morning skate. He knew exactly what he was doing and what he was saying. He was sending a message. And, Pinder, you can make the point about his play over the last couple games since saying that, and that's fine. But the fact that someone said it and the fact that it was October 25th, to me, is what jumps off the page.
And I think that's why the other teammates are trying to tamp it down. It's like, buddy, don't overreact here. We don't need another grenade. But he's right. I think he's right.
He's saying it publicly. We're only seeing 3% of what it actually is. It's probably a lot bigger than that.
For sure.
And he's saying it to sound the alarm. Now, this is where the next part of the equation needs to come in terms of action. Because you've heard little cracks at it before, and you've seen people sort of pull the thread here. How soon until you see some kind of transaction where you begin to try and fix what's ailing the team? And I don't know what I'm not there. I'm not behind those closed doors. I don't know what the issue is, but clearly there's something about this group that doesn't mix.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he didn't really veil who he was pointed at either when he talks about, star players not liking certain coaches. I think it's the guys everyone's talking about that seem to be the direction of his comments. And like, what do? You go trade for Duclair out of San Jose? How do you fix it? I don't know.
Let me ask you that. If you say that Coleman was trying to tamp it down and Zadorov was highly critical, who are you closer to believing? I'll start with you.
100%. It's not even a question, Zadorov.
Because that's where I fall in. And then you go back to less than a year ago when Nazem Kadri was on Frankly Speaking and was asked, the Flames make the playoffs if we start playing like a team. So and then
he went on to be their worst player the rest of the season. It was very similar, actually.
But I mean, regardless of performance, and you and I have gone back and forth on this since last night. Performance be damned. This is multiple guys who are saying shit ain't working.
Yeah.
So you can focus on how they play in the next game, or you can focus on the bigger thing that, and we've talked about it for years. Last year, we used the word dysfunctional over and over and over, and it's worse now. And they've fired a coach and moved out a GM and done all of this, and it's the same thing. And we go back even beyond that, when it was the Tkachuk against Muzzin, and no one backed him up, and it was, the room's great. The room's great. Room ain't great.
I don't think anyone's going to fight you on the mix not being right.
I was talking to a Hall of Famer this weekend, all the legends in town in Edmonton, and he goes, one of the things that really pisses me off about listening to players talk in the media today is say we have a close team. He goes, what does that even mean? What does that mean, close team? If you don't play like it doesn't matter whether you can go out and pound 100 beers or not.
If you're not going to stick up for each other, yeah.
Doesn't matter. And we haven't seen that yet.
Were you going to say something there?
I was going to say I fucking told you so, but I don't need to.
That's pretty good.
He's been saying that for a year. We've got that message clear.
Yeah. So it's...
you know what? I'll say it on his behalf. Daryl Sutter told you so too, and we all said you're an idiot and an asshole.
Well, he said he was an idiot. He made some questionable decisions. I don't think his treatment of the Stars
made those questionable decisions because he saw something that the rest of us, or some of us, were maybe missing. He's been around the game for 100 years.
I'm talking less about the vets. I'm talking more about the treatment of young players and how that hurt the club.
Sure, absolutely.
Both of those things can be true at the same time.
Yeah, and to be fair, Rhett was critical of Daryl last year in some of those things, but I don't think he was wrong on Huberdeau. And you'd hoped that a fresh coach would change, but you can't just remove an $84 million player. You can remove a $4 million coach. I understand why the players won that tug of war. It was their only chance to try to say, okay, if Huberdeau says it's a problem, we can't just cut him loose. We can't cut the coaches. It's a tough spot to be in.
And I still, it's almost not even a criticism, but you got to think that Treliving saw the writing on the wall with this group.
I don't think so. I think if things had gone a different way, he'd still
Well,
be
of
in
course, if
Calgary.
things go a different way, but they didn't go away. And as soon as he saw that, he's like, how are we pulling out of this?
Also part of the dysfunction.
He built a small
Well,
window
that
for
was
this team to be
incredibly
competitive.
dysfunctional.
Yeah,
The way that went out.
all the bets that Treliving made, like maybe they were a 4 out of 10 to succeed, and this was a 4 out of 10, and that was a 3 out of 10. None of them hit, and all those deals set you up for 2 to 3 years of contention, and you knew after that was going to be gross. But we can deal with that as long as we get some good deep playoff runs.
So okay, hold on a second. I've said this really consistently since I started, with you guys. Let's take a step back. This whole thing, we have to think macro here. 30,000 foot view. It's not going back to what you were just talking about with Zadorov. It's not about him saying it and then having 2 games where he doesn't play well. There's an overall, we're talking about symptoms and not the disease here. And if you want to talk about how the team was set up and the roster construction, you got to take a bigger step back and look at really who's controlling who's the person at the controls. And that's ownership. That's where the directive comes from, because I think there's been a number of different people there that probably at one point or another would have liked to have said, hey, the best course for the Flames right now is to tear it down, is to try and rebuild, try and get a top 3 pick for the first time, try and be in that mix to reboot. That's the best course of action. But when you're being held to a different standard and you have a different mandate, you can only do what you can within those parameters. And that's what all these guys are dealing with. It's what Brad Treliving was dealing with. It's now what Craig Conroy's dealing with. Why do you think there's been such a push to try and get some of these guys re-signed? Because that is the path to being as competitive as possible. Look at what's happening around the league. 2 of the 7 Canadian teams did not sell out their home opener this year. Someone had to fly to Winnipeg to ask Jets chairman Mark Chipman whether any sort of relocation talk was fantasy. That's where we're at in today's business with the NHL. Ticket prices are high. Fans don't want to come out and buy into a team that they don't believe in, and rightfully so. And you've got owners that aren't wanting to dig deep into their pockets to fund this operation. They want to have a team that's in the mix. You got to have a stomach to have 5 to 8 years of writing $50 million checks a year.
And dig deeper into that. There's 32 teams. Half are going to be in the mix.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I think the bad attendance would help Murray flip his opinion, to be fair, Frank. It's not like you're adding talent when you extend guys. You're just keeping the same group that already isn't drawing people. I think if his plan was we bring it back with a new coach, I expect revenue to be X because this team will be competitive. When it's not and people stop showing up because they're disenchanted with this group, you say, oh, my plan to get revenue to X didn't work. We need a new plan. And I wouldn't be surprised. The only time this club's ever rebuilt is when they were forced to because their team was old and bad. It was the same thing with Jerome when Jay Feaster was here. You can't trade him. You can't trade him. You even know not to ask to trade him, even when everyone sees you're not good enough with Jerome, and he just scored 41 goals. This is the point where this franchise, since he's been the majority owner, has decided to rebuild. When they've been so stubborn on being competitive that they get old, mediocre, and they're forced to rebuild.
I guess, because I thought about that last night. I wonder if part of that is in ownership's thinking as well, because they did. They sold Jay Bouwmeester and they sold Jerome McGinley and they sold off. They didn't do well on any of those deals. Emile Poirier and Morgan Klimchuk and the U.S. college guys that they got. I'm not to rebuild. It's what you do, but they did a version of that, and it didn't help them at all.
Mm-hmm.
None of the assets that they got from selling off their big guys helped the cause. So I don't know if that makes him a little leery of it. I guess, Frank, we'll let you go because this is depressing as hell.
Jeez.
It is early. We sit here because we watch this every single day. We talk about it every single day. So it's kind of riding that balance of being too negative or whatever. How much of a sample size do you need to see of this year's team before you say, yeah, I feel confident knowing what that team is and that this is the path they should take?
Each successive game feels a little bit more like a continuation of last season. I'd like to get to a quarter of the year before really trying to make that determination, but we're getting close to that point where it seems to be pretty overwhelming that this group is what it is, especially when you have players coming out to send a message that they have to this point. That's the alarming part, is they're telling you there's a problem. And, at some point, I'm reminded of this all the time. If someone's telling you what they are, you got to believe them.
Yeah. If they keep telling you.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And this is why we always talk about US Thanksgiving. That's around the quarter pole. The numbers hate you if you're out by a certain margin at that point. There's always the outlier like the Blues that were last place in early January. But I think you have to trust that if you're really bad at US Thanksgiving, you're really bad. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to check out more of our content right here on the Flames Nation YouTube page. We had a bunch of great long form interviews. You can check out some videos we've done as well outside of the studio. And of course, if you want more writing or merchandise stuff, flamesnation.ca or nationgear.ca. Appreciate you watching.